In this video, I'll show you how I tattoo this realistic shark. You can find the stencil template to follow along in the video description. Before you start the tattoo to replicate it, I'd recommend watching the entire video first so you don't make the same mistake I did here. I use Ganga Black by Dynamic for pure black. And for the 3 gray tones, I use Greywash 80 by Dynamic. I fill in the rest using shading solution. You can find the products I use in the video description, and with the code fanitattoo, you get 10% off your order. For the stencil, I use Speed Stick, but be careful, don't use it on real skin. Take your time pressing it down. You want every line of the stencil to be visible. I think the Speed Stick cap works best for this. You can use it to evenly smooth out the stencil everywhere. Then I let it dry for about 24 hours. The next day, this is how it looks after rinsing it with water. I start with a 3-round liner needle. I start with the lightest gray to draw the first lines. Since the underside of the shark is very light, I shouldn't use dark gray. With a realistic design, very few lines should be visible in the end. I always keep the reference directly in my line of sight so I can determine the correct shades of gray while working, and I'd recommend you do the same. If you're unsure whether you're using the right gray, it's better to go with a lighter one. To understand this better, keep in mind that all lines must be blended in the end, and if a line is too dark, unfortunately, you can't fix it later. What makes a good tattoo? In my opinion, it's often just a small but fine detail that makes a big impact on the final result. I believe a good tattoo is defined by being done with care from start to finish. Every single step was done carefully, and of course, with attention to detail. I often see average tattoos with nice shading, clean lines, and well-filled areas. That's perfectly fine. But if you want to go a step further and stand out, you have to work with lots of details. I'll show you later exactly what I mean. Now I'm using the second darkest gray tone. You might be wondering why I'm not using pure black here, even though the area next to it is so dark. The simple reason is that it will be easier for me to blend this line later on. A black line is almost impossible to blend away with shading, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, it's better to work slightly too light than too dark. This is especially important in realism. I put a lot of effort into creating detailed and in-depth tutorials for you, all while working as a tattoo artist. If you'd like to support me, I'd really appreciate it if you give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, since there are more videos coming that you won't want to miss. Even though I still have a very dark gray in my cartridge, I can make a line here that starts light and gradually gets darker. Here's how that works. In areas where I want a lighter line, I apply less pressure. The darker I want the line, the more pressure I use. What if I want to switch back from dark gray to the second lightest gray? I need to rinse my needle. I use a disposable cup with distilled water for that. But you only need to do this when switching from dark to light. If a line seems too long to do in one go, you should lift the needle off the skin very gently to avoid visible transitions later. For those of you recreating this tattoo at home, your goal should be to make the outermost contour as clean as possible. If the design has a perfectly sharp outer edge, you're already halfway there. You can clearly see at the shark's gills why I do some lines as dotted lines. If I had even drawn the shading guides as solid lines on the stencil, it would now be completely confusing. This way, I can clearly tell which lines I'm supposed to tattoo. In areas that will be shaded, lines don't belong. So, the dotted lines on the stencil shouldn't be tattooed even in light gray. That would only make things unnecessarily difficult for you. For the eye, I always use pure black, because I want the eye to have a certain depth. We need to leave a small area in the eye blank, so we can tattoo it with white later. I'm already excited for that moment when we get to it. Now I'm switching to a 13 soft edge Magnum needle. I adjust the stroke to 3.3 millimeters. The lower the stroke, the softer the machine runs. With the first technique I show you, I don't work directly up to the edges with the Magnum needle, but focus only on the areas that are easily accessible. It would be a waste of time to try working up to the edge with such a large needle. If it's a straight line, you can do it. But with an irregular line, it's harder to work along the edge. This shading technique is called pull whip shading. With this method, you only shade in one direction. It's a very beginner-friendly technique since the needle just gently glides over the skin. It's especially great for light shading. This allows you to gradually build up the shading, and the more times you go over the same spot, the darker it becomes. There's no other technique that's gentler on the skin, which is why you can use this method to make multiple passes. However, on real skin, you must be careful not to damage it with too many passes. The machine settings stay the same, but now I switch the needle to a 7-round liner and use pure black. If you prefer to use a round shader, feel free to do so. That would make the shading even softer. However, I want to create some texture in the shark, and that works better with a thinner needle. Now I'm using the second darkest gray tone again. Take your time and work carefully. Speed comes naturally with time and a lot of practice. It's also important to note that fake skin absorbs ink much less easily than real skin, so you wouldn't actually need as many passes as I'm doing here. The lower part of the fin is a bit darker than the upper part. That's why we're doing it with pure black. For the advanced artists among you, feel free to work all the way up to the edges with the Magnum needle, but only if you're confident you won't go past the edges. That takes practice, and it's totally normal if it's really difficult at first. The upper part of the fin is also very dark, but not black. So I'm using the second darkest gray tone here and not applying maximum pressure. This requires a bit more sensitivity. To make it easier for myself with the larger areas, I'm using a 13 soft edge Magnum. Even though this part of the shark is very light, it's not completely white, so we shade the entire area with a light gray tone. I'm leaving the head out for now because areas that are very important require special focus. Before that, I take a break, have a coffee, and then continue with full concentration. Now I've switched back to pure black because, as I mentioned earlier, fake skin doesn't take in the ink that well. So I'm going over a few areas to darken them up. After a few minutes break, I start on the head. First, I go along the edges with the second darkest gray and a 7-round liner. I can't stress enough how important this is for a clean final result. With the 9 Magnum needle, I can now blend everything beautifully. Do you see the line above the eye? Even though I'm working very dark, that line doesn't blend away easily. It's not super disruptive, but it's a good example of why you need to be extremely careful with where you draw lines, especially in a realistic design. Here at the shark's gills, you can clearly see that it's much easier to work along a straight line than along an uneven one. That's why I'm doing the shading up to the edge directly with the Magnum needle here. With the 7-round liner, I now carefully work around all the edges and give the shark a few more details. You can really go wild here, and the more details we add, the more fearsome and realistic the shark will look in the end. How much time you take for this is entirely up to you. I work on it until I'm completely satisfied with the result. Since I filmed the shark for you after an 8-hour tattoo session, I wasn't as focused as usual. It's not easy for me to admit mistakes, but honestly, I should have shaded the front fin right after doing the rear fin. The same goes for the back part of the belly. I could have shaded it right away, along with the front part. But in my opinion, these are classic mistakes that happen when you're not 100% focused, and they still happen to me even after 10 years of tattooing. The only downside now is that I have to change needles and gray tones more often. However, this doesn't affect the final result. Now I'm adding a few white highlights. White accents make a huge difference in a design like this. They make it look much more lively. If you want to learn how I tattoo the ultimate challenge, the realistic portrait, I've created an online course where I reveal my secrets and have prepared many hours of material for you to follow along and learn. Because many people asked, once you buy the course, you get lifetime access and there will be new videos that are only available there. If you're interested in the course, check out this video here.